Hey, what's going on, everybody? We are coming to you live from American Top Team here in Watertown with episode 37 of Cage Side Convos. I'm Rick Huntsman.
What's up? This is Quince.
And so this week we're going to talk a little bit about strength. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of what it means to be strong and just different areas of life. Kind of we were talking a little bit before we turned the camera on, and what happened is the other day I was doing some strength training myself, and I've been reading a lot lately about just kind of overall athletic development, and the basis of all athletic development of sprinting, of jumping, of throwing, anything athletic that you're going to do is strength. Is physically being strong, right? And it's something that's neglected a lot in sports these days, or you see a lot of early specialization in youth athletes, and so like 6 or 7 years old they start playing baseball, and that's the only sport they play for their entire life, and inevitably they end up getting injured. You know, so kids are getting injured earlier, having more severe injuries, and you even see as a product of that, professional athletes seem to be getting hurt more frequently and stuff, and a lot of times it's a byproduct of not strength training in the off season, or strength training during the season, or cross training and developing themselves in other aspects, right? And just focusing on one sport. So that kind of got me thinking of just the importance of having a strong body and being able to perform kind of other tasks, right? But obviously, as with most of the things that we talk about, the metaphors that we find in the weight room or on the mats, or through like our musician or like musical experiences and stuff like that, artistry, there's always metaphors for it in different areas of life. You know, so kind of started thinking about, well, if you want to be successful as a person, logically it dictates that you need to have a strong base.
Sure.
And kind of started thinking about maybe what that entails.
Yeah. And I think it always entails different components of life.
Right.
Just like, when you're talking about strength training and strength foundations, there are different components of that. There are, actual weight, weight strength and muscular strength. I think there's a strength in like flexibility, and being agile, which I think can keep those injuries down.
Right.
A strength in endurance.
Right.
And these are all individual counterpoints in which have their own foundation to build upon. And I think same thing goes for being an artist.
Right.
There are different strength components, and whether that's so say for a performer or for a writer or a poet, your use of words and your understanding of words, I think, is a strength. Your ability to overcome fear and get on stage and perform, just in general, it takes a form of strength, as does endurance and things like that.
So I guess when, obviously, physical strength is very commonly understood. What does it mean to be strong? It means you can lift a lot of weight, right? But when you start expanding the definition of strength, so the way you're saying is, overcoming that fear of getting on stage is a strength. Well, now strength doesn't mean physically strong, because it doesn't matter how physically strong you are, right? So it's mental strength, right? But it's fortitude. So I guess maybe strength can be defined as an affinity for a specific area, being good at something, right? So that's how we can define strength.
Okay.
Right? So, for you, one of your strengths is you're well spoken, or you have an affinity for understanding language, or being able to express yourself with language.
I think that one.
Right.
I think it's that one. Because I don't. There was a point in time in which my head would be in the dictionary, and writing things down, highlighting and taking notes on it, and even throughout life, even when I wasn't as adamant, it still was a joy of mine to come across the word I didn't understand, or one that I thought accentuated the phrase or whatever they're trying to get across. And so I would take that initiative and go and look it up. So there's always a part of that naturally that stays with me. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is individual ability to communicate what I see, express what I see and how I interpret things.
So that's interesting to kind of put that back in terms of the metaphor of the weight room, right? If you want to become stronger at expressing yourself, you put in the reps, and you're essentially, metaphorically, you're increasing the weight every rep, because you're reading more, you're learning more, and you have to push yourself harder to find a new word you don't know, right?
Absolutely.
So for anybody that's ever done any amount of strength training, when you first start, what happens is, say, the first day in the weight room, you bench press 100 pounds. Well, the next time you go in there, you can bench press like 135. The very next time, all of a sudden you're at like 155. You're like, holy shit, I'm getting stronger in leaps and bounds. I'm physically getting stronger. Well, first time you open the dictionary, in the first 20 pages, you learn, 30, 40 different words. You're like, holy shit, I'm going to learn all this stuff real quick. But the more you learn, the stronger you get in that area, the harder it is to push yourself to that level where you don't know something, right? So we talk a lot about discipline. So whether we're gaining physical strength, mental fortitude, we're enhancing our ability to express ourselves. It takes a certain amount of discipline, because at a certain point you stagnate and you plateau. But the basic understanding of words, right, is your building block, right? Because just because you know all these words doesn't mean you can put them together yet either.
Exactly.
So it's just like an athlete needs to be strong, but if you're a running back, it's good to be strong, because those are your words. Those are knowing what the words mean.
Right.
But your ability to make cuts and to read a defense and to drive, or the mental fortitude to keep your legs pumping when you run into the line or whatever.
Right.
All that is the next step. Is how we put it together.
Yeah, putting all those components together.
So it's taking your physical strength, your foundation, that is physical strength, or knowledge of words, right? Yep. It's putting it together into a metaphorical strength and affinity to express yourself or to perform athletically.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And what I think is interesting is that, in the sense that you're speaking, when you're trying to build strength muscularly, you're watching the weight go up week after week after week. Yeah. But for me, as an artist and someone who uses words, something that might take a paragraph or a certain amount of words to convey years ago, strength to me is now being able to convey that in 1 to 2 sentences.
Right.
And whittling that down instead of, building more.
Right.
And I think to have more meaning in one line, to me is a form of strength. Right. In that respect.
But that's interesting, because now that calls into, that brings into the conversation efficiency. Being strong with words, it can be seen as being efficient with language.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And then if you examine that in the context of physically lifting weight, getting stronger essentially is making your body more efficient at moving weight.
Sure.
So that's a very interesting way of examining it. And again, it kind of rounds out the definition of what it means to be strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was kind of thinking about, we talk obviously a lot about music, and being a bass player. What I found is that when I set my guitar down for a long period of time and I come back and I start playing, if I try to just go through and play the same amount that I used to for the same length of time with the same intensity, like when you play out live, the intensity is always higher. What'll happen is, if it's been too long, I'll get calluses. I'll rip my fingers open again, or my arms will actually get tired. Right. Or my forearms from playing and from moving around the fretboard and stuff, which is literally physical strength. It's physical conditioning that it takes, and it's something that I've been playing bass for 17 years, and I always underestimate that. How much physical conditioning goes into it. And it's always a reminder, that physical strength plays a part into everything that you do.
Yeah, and it's just that muscle memory.
Yeah.
Sometimes, which of course, practice makes perfect, and being able to keep up that continuity is good.
Yeah.
But sometimes I find that taking a break from it for a little while.
Right.
So for me, like freestyling, if I just hanging out either with friends or other artists, or even if it's just myself and I'm freestyling for a bit, there's a certain amount of time in which I'll get better and better and better.
Yeah.
But then it'll kind of plateau off, and nothing new is necessarily coming to me. I get stuck in these routines or ruts, or I'm not able to expand creatively upon certain words. You might use the same. So when I take that time away, although I might not have that endurance that you're saying that you were lacking, but sometimes I have this freshness of mind and clarity of mind when I hop back into it.
So yeah, and then now we have to look at mental strength as well, right? Because everybody says it's a cliche, your mind is a muscle too, and your mind needs to be exercised. But one of the biggest things that's underestimated by everybody is rest. Okay, so curious thing, and I have to have this discussion with a lot of my athletes, especially younger athletes, guys that are I get women too, anybody that comes in and trains that's typically in their early 20s, early to mid 20s, is they just want to go balls to the wall all the time.
Right.
And I say, like, listen, you have to rest because you don't get stronger while you're lifting weights.
Yeah.
You get stronger in the recovery period, right?
Sure.
And so the way that strength training works is that we physically break our muscles down. This is muscular hypertrophy, right? So you break your muscles down, and then they have to be rebuilt, and that's when they're rebuilt stronger.
Right.
It's the same way like calluses work on your hands and stuff. You rip your hands all up, then the skin that grows back is stronger to cover for that. But if you just keep your hands cut wide open, they're never going to heal.
Right. So you can lift every day, but if you're not getting the proper rest and recovery, you're going to have a slower increase in strength than you would if you lifted 3 times a day with proper rest, proper diet.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's that point of burnout that you're talking about mentally.
Yeah.
You know, at a certain point, you have to take a step back. You have to rest. You know, and there's no such thing as overtrained. It's just under recovered. Right?
I like that.
So people I'll have athletes that'll come in and say they're doing sprint workouts like 3 to 4 times a week. No, man, they don't. You're gonna burn yourself out. It's a very high intensity exercise, so it's important to learn to balance that. But that's a metaphorical strength as well, as learning to find balance.
Sure.
You know, is having an affinity for understanding. Okay, this is how much I can push my body. This is how much time I need to rest and recover. And which is why it's you go into the weight room, and some people love circuit training, and I do. Maybe once a week I'll do some kind of form of circuit training. But for the most part, when I'm in the weight room, it's regular strength training sets with 1 to 2 minutes of rest in between my sets, and letting my body recover even in the course of the workout, and then anywhere from 3 to 7 days before I work out that muscle group again.
Right. Right. Yeah, same thing with writing songs. What do we got?
Got Alex Slurry tuning in. What's up, my dudes? Have a great 4th of July weekend and be safe. Yes, absolutely. Alex, you too, man. I think no matter when we turn on or how much of a break we take in between, Alex is always good for jumping in with a
popping on,
comment,
saying what's good.
Always something positive and happy too, man. Alex, thank you for the shout out, brother. Hope you have a safe weekend as well.
Yo.
I'm sure you're going to be doing some very fun shit.
Oh yeah, they've got the pool. They got the pool over there. They've got the whole family over on that side of town.
Yeah.
Good people.
Good deal.
But yeah, as far as overdoing it, what's interesting to me, because I think that's almost the difference between passion and purpose in a way. Because I've been thinking about it recently, and when I was first getting into this more often, as far as art and music and writing, I think my passion for it led me to do it night and day, and I didn't really care too much about rest. I didn't really take into consideration all the other aspects of life that maybe needed to be kept in balance. But I was still able to get work closer to my 10,000 hours.
Sure.
So almost obsessively with this passion, with this emotional, fleeting thing. But the difference is now with the understanding of purpose, and understanding that passion is emotional, and one day you might wake up and that shit might be gone. But I think purpose is something that allows me to look further into the future and be like, well, yeah, I want to get this done. I want to be at this level. What else do I have to do to make that happen? It doesn't always just involve writing song after song. Write a song when I feel it, go out and live life, you know, handle my shit, either work or within the family and things like that. So now the purpose and the longevity of that understanding for me, in turn, help the quality of the song. So the passion never really goes anywhere. I can keep utilizing. It's never all spent at once. And so when you're bringing up some of the younger students that come in that are balls to the wall and want to continue this chat, I think it's all off of passion. So it just kind of sparked that to mind.
That's awesome. That's an awesome way to look at it. Definitely a little bit outside of the realm of how I examine passion and purpose. We talked about this a little bit too. Is there's a difference between emotional passion and purposeful passion. But I think so that emotional passion, I think, burns hot, and it feels a lot like motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a lot like drive, right? And you see somebody that's passionate, and people often say that person is very motivated to drive forward, and it sounds a lot like we were talking about that night and day grind. You're just very motivated all the time, very passionate, but eventually it burns out.
Right.
And it's interesting to hear you break it down like that, and you say that your purpose, what it sounds like to me is that purpose instills that notion of longevity,
Right.
And it allows for rest. I think purpose allows for rest in the way that you define it.
Because it's equally as necessary
Yeah,
as the work sometimes,
right.
like you mentioned.
Right. So you start understanding it in a notion of goal orientation as opposed to
Right.
just having to get everything done now.
Exactly.
Because when you're passionate and you're emotional, we talk a lot about the ephemeral nature of emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The short-lived nature of emotions. And if you have a feeling, because you know, I think inherently we always know that emotion is fleeting, or that passion, that motivation is fleeting.
Yeah.
So we want to get everything done right now because we have our eyes set on what's right here. But I think once you understand that notion of purpose and you believe in that longevity,
Right.
then it allows for rest.
Yeah, and that's, to me, a strength in experience.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Experience and understanding, and these are different levels in which you're not put onto, you don't understand yet, you haven't gone to. So unless you've got a mentor or someone you trust, they can tell you and you can learn from that. You know, that's one thing, but more often than not, you got to find out by doing and by going through that work.
Well, by lifting the weight.
By lifting
by
the weight.
metaphorically, by lifting the weight, by doing those reps, and by gaining strength.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So, a very interesting thing. I wrote down before we talked, and I didn't tell you I wrote it down, and because I just wanted to pop it up, but you kind of touched on it, and I wanted to talk about cultivating strengths versus building on your areas of weakness, right? So sometimes we say, okay, well, we talk about the necessity of self-evaluation and of understanding where we're weak,
Right.
where we need to grow, right? So I think a little bit of what you touched on when you started talking about purpose was, okay, there's other areas of my life that I need to elevate so I can be better at this thing that I'm already good at. Right? So for you, where do you think the balance is, and what do you think the importance is of building on your strengths and building areas that you're weak, and how do you try to find a balance between them?
Sure. Well, I think there's a natural back and forth at times at the beginning. And I think naturally you tend to lean on your strengths and try to, shy away from the weaknesses.
Okay.
At first. And sometimes what you're, no, I don't want to get into that yet. But,
It seemed like that was a deep rabbit hole.
But what I found, as everything is. But what I found was that in combating those weaknesses, which might even take less effort, if you can just get over that fear and combat your weakness, that automatically flips it and turns it into a strength. So, for example, my approach to music, sure, I could write songs all day long. I could go in the studio and record them. I could record them at home. But ultimately, when you think of the future, ultimately I was going to have to hop on a stage and get in front of people.
Sure.
and do it and put myself out there in that way. So to me, that was a weakness. You know, I was, you know, young age, you know, very shy individual. You know, I always listened more than I spoke. And while that was a strength in a sense, in times like this, and when I had to hop on the stage or be in front of people and present something, I mean, that was the last place I wanted to be. So that certainly was a weakness of mine until I understood through purpose that it was going to put me in that position. So if I could meet it head on, that would, I mean, just skyrocket me up as far as where I was at right then. You know, and so, you know, going back to the JCC, I used the opportunity to take a public speaking course,
Right.
and just talk about the shit that I knew of.
Right.
You know, so that helped the comfort level, and then I was able to transition that to the stage.
Right.
You know, and once I got over that, things just kind of like kept snowballing. So, you know, so like I said, and then once you tighten up some of these weaknesses, to go back to the strength, which is, you know, the fun part, it kind of balances out life a little more.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely just kind of going through life, I always shied away from talking about my weaknesses or from focusing on them or from trying to build them because I never wanted to be perceived as weak.
Right.
You know, which I think is a lot of ego, and I think is a lot of stuff that we all kind of naturally go through. So there's the tendency to just focus on building our strengths, like what am I good at, and I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay in my zone. And I've always been fairly good at having conversations with people, but usually on the end where I'm the one doing the talking.
Right.
I think I have a tendency to I speak loud sometimes, if not directly, or loud and directly, and but I had to take a step back and realize that sometimes it can be intimidating too. You know, 6'4", and I stand over people, and I usually carry myself fairly large, you know, and I don't think that I'm shy in a one-to-one situation, and so I think that what I perceive as being a strength sometimes would be almost overpowering and off-putting for the other person, because I do have a tendency to talk a lot, so I was very weak at listening. And once I got to the point where I realized that, and realized that I would be better served not only to show compassion and empathy to the person I'm having a discussion with, but I learn a lot more if I listen. And once I started developing the strength as a listener, I realized I actually got a lot better as a speaker too. Now, I think it's important to practice your strengths, right? So if we look at when I have a fight, or when I have especially when someone's getting ready for MMA, right? So it's mixed martial arts, obviously. So there's multiple disciplines that are going on at the same time. Typically, you'll have somebody who prevails in one area. Maybe they're a good wrestler. Maybe they're good at jiu-jitsu. Maybe they're a very good striker. Maybe they're great at wall work. Maybe they're great at controlling the center, right? You know, maybe they're a good kickboxer. Maybe they're just, you know, good with their hands, whatever. So when you have somebody come in, if they're naturally a wrestler, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to make them a striker. To try to just say, okay, listen, we're going to go out here and throw hands. Now, maybe on the amateur level, it makes sense to say, okay, this fight, I want you to test yourself. I just want you to go out there, either beating everybody with your wrestling, go out there and do something different. But once you get to a professional level, and it is about winning, it's about getting to that next level, it's important to be strong. You know, you look at, for those who follow UFC, I mean, the most stellar wrestler that there is right now is Khabib. And he just goes out there and he wrestles everybody and grinds them for 25 minutes. And it's miserable. But he practices that. That's his bread and butter. But that doesn't mean he's not practicing striking. You know, so it's important to gain at least enough of an understanding that, you know, the more you polish up your striking, the more your wrestling can develop. Because then you have more weapons that you can set up your ground game with. You know. Now we might never go out and win a Golden Gloves title as a boxer, right? But you can still become more well-rounded, and the more you build up that foundation, the more avenues you have to get to what you're good at.
Right.
You know, so if you just focus on your strengths, you have a pillar that just goes straight up, and if you get outside of that, you fall. You know, or it gets pushed over and you beat. But you start developing your weaknesses, then you have more of a foundation, you have more to lean on when your strengths start getting tested and you start getting pushed, you know.
Sure.
So I think it's important not to get so distracted on only building your weaknesses that you forget about your strength,
Right.
because then that becomes a weakness in its own right, you know. And a lot of times, naturally where we're strong is something going to be something we enjoy.
Yeah.
You know.
And so, something else that comes to mind that I think is kind of interesting that I thought of while you were talking is that, and you're absolutely right. You know, definitely adhering to your weaknesses and building them up. So you know what they say, that you're only strong as the weakest link type of thing.
Sure.
But also, as I think back even to maybe what drew me to music in the first place, was that it is a form of expression. And I guess, you know, always in conversation when I was younger, I was always the type to get to A to B like that.
Yeah.
Whether it was maybe the conversation or all the small talk and bullshit I kind of skipped over. So think of math class, writing down the answer but getting it marked wrong because I didn't show the work.
Right.
Or in some conversations, you know, I was just get to the point and people would be like, wait, I don't get it.
Right,
You know, I didn't
right.
follow these conversational steps. And so that kind of had me not raising my hand in class or not really speaking up, you know, in social situations. And then I think music, that's kind of what it is. Having every line mean something and mean more than one thing, and have, you know, people be able to interpret it differently. So in certain situations where that was a weakness for me to be in, you pick me up and you put me in another situation and it becomes a strength.
Right.
So I think that always stood out to me as far as, you know, turning your weaknesses into strengths.
Right.
You know, and there's always the little things to hone and to work on as far as technique and things
Right.
like that. But I think environment, you know, and like I said, where, you know, what you're dealing with. I think we were talking a little bit before, you know, you put a fish on a bicycle and he's not really going to go anywhere.
Right.
He's probably just going to flop around on the seat or some shit. But
And then die.
yeah, and then die, you know, whole breathing thing. But, you know, a fish in water is graceful, can maneuver however it wants, and, you know, it's in its element. So I think that element is just as important as the word itself.
What's interesting to me in that is one thing I talk about, especially with my students who just started jiu-jitsu. There's a tendency, because there's a lot going on when you grapple, right? And I mean, even in boxing, right? You know, so we spar in boxing, and it seems like there's a lot going on, especially if the other person's moving a lot.
Right.
It seems like there's a ton of shit going on, and then in that chaos, we kind of lose ourselves, right? We
Right.
become the fish on the bicycle, right? So what I'll tell my students, like I said, very specifically in jiu-jitsu, when they're new, is I'll say, if you don't know what to do, get back to a situation you do. Find a situation that you're familiar with, and you know what to work on there.
Sure.
Inevitably, what ends up happening is the longer we train, and the more we practice, the more reps we get in, the more we build our strength, the more opportunities we have to get back to a situation we recognize.
Okay.
Right? So, for the fish on the bicycle, you know, it's going to panic. But if it knows, okay, all I have to do is figure out how to get back to that water,
Yep.
right? That's all it's going to do. It's going to steer that bike into the lake, and then it's going to be back to where it can survive and where it understands, right? And then, I mean, obviously, this is a kind of a more cartoonish metaphor because we're not actually going to put a fish on a bicycle and see how this works. But
Right.
the more times the fish gets on that bike, the more it's going to start seeing more avenues back to that water, right? And different ways to get back there, or different places that have water, and places that it can be more comfortable and strong,
Sure.
right? So when we examine this as even from like a conversational aspect, I feel comfortable now after 15 years of practicing conversation, of concerted effort to become a better conversationalist. I feel like I can sit down with anybody and have a conversation where I'm not just a sounding board, where I'm not just sitting there dumb, where I can provide something to the conversation, I can get something from it, because for me, I'm weak in most of the areas of my life, the more that I learn about stuff, the more I find out I'm weak in most areas. Right? There are very few things that I actually have a strength in and that I can talk to with any kind of semblance of expertise in. You know?
Sure.
Very few things, but I can always find something that I recognize in a conversation
Right.
and relate it back to something I am strong at, and at least have a conversationalist understanding of. I might be dumb. It might just be me asking questions, but trying to relate it back to something I know.
Right.
It's just finding where I'm strong and how to connect where I'm weak to where I'm strong, and that will help me build from there.
Exactly. And that brings me back to the public speaking class.
Right.
Where I got to choose my topics, and I made a, one of them I taught everyone how to freestyle, or what it was, and how the left and right hemisphere of the brains came together. And as it did that, it took focus away from the prefrontal cortex. So in doing stuff like that, when people say they are in the zone and they kind of black out, that's because their focus is going away from the prefrontal and everything else is working together. So, and that shit was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm talking about, because this is what I enjoy to learn about every day. And then at the end, I played a beat, and everyone that had written on an index card, I pulled out a card and was just freestyling off that. So to me, it came natural, even though being up in front of the class was the last place I wanted to be. But if I had to do it, I was able to bring it back to stuff I knew or loved to do. So that combination is how I got, you know what I mean? How I got through it. Super important. Important is to find that comfort zone.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's interesting because we talked a while ago about comfort zones and how comfort zones can sometimes be a weakness, but in this context, where we're strong, something we're good at, we can use that as a way to experiment with somewhere we're not strong, somewhere we're completely uncomfortable.
Right. In that chaos.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So we can use that strength, that strong point to find reliability and to get our legs under us a little bit and build.
Right.
So you took your strength of freestyling, you tied it into your public speaking where you were not good, but then ultimately you got better at public speaking.
Sure. And I want to say strength of freestyling, probably love for freestyling.
Well,
make that clear.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm strong there, but the thing is, what's interesting to me and something I love, and I love reminding myself of, is that it's damn near impossible to practice something consistently and not get better at it, not become stronger at
Sure.
it. You might never think that you're good at something, but you're always getting better.
Sure.
You're always getting better. And someone who never freestyles, if you and I sat down and you're like, come on, Rick, freestyle with me. I would say no, and then very shortly later you'd find out why I said no.
Right.
Because that's something that I have absolutely no strength in.
Yeah.
But if I don't like comparison mindsets, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we're not brand new at something.
Sure.
There are a lot of people that don't do what we do, and there is a certain amount of strength that we've acquired in our in what we would consider our strong suits, and it's important to remember sometimes say, okay, well, I used to be back there and now I'm here, and understanding that strength is a progression.
So, and that's important to keep in mind because we're living every day in the mirror as individuals. So like whether you're trying to lose weight, trying to gain muscle, or get better at whatever craft, you're seeing it every day. So you don't notice the change. But after a certain amount of time, what happens when you go and hang out with friends, or you see family, or when you hit the stage and you see the reaction and the response, you're like, oh shit, something changed. I don't know what it is, but something changed. But having that happen time and time again, helps you do, again, trust in that process of what end up doing. But that's great because sometimes it's easy to get lost in, man, I'm not going anywhere. It's not leading me to anything. Kind of getting hung up on that. But having that strength and experience allows you to find little things, even on your own, as far as check marks or checkpoints that you can pay attention to know that that progression is there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, strength anything isn't something that's going to happen overnight.
Right.
You know, you're not gonna walk into the weight room and, you know, struggle to put up 95 pounds on the bench one day and then the very next day, you know, PR at 250.
Sure.
You know, it's not gonna happen.
Sure.
You'll, like I said early on, you always see a lot of progress, but you know, you go through. Typically, for me, when I was strength training consistently, and that was my only discipline, usually about every 6 to 8 weeks, I would take a rest week, just completely not train, or I would do like a deload week where I would just do some really light, like calisthenic stuff, and then coming back, I would almost completely change my routine. And as soon as I would do that, I would suck at it. But 6 to 8 weeks later, I'd be awesome at it, and then I'd take a week off, and then I would completely change it again, right?
Sure.
So, but overall, my strength was, you know, always going up. But it's important to understand that in order to continue to gain strength, we have to change up the routine sometimes. You know, we have to challenge it, and we have to put ourselves back to square one sometimes.
Yep.
But our new square one's not going to be the same square one we were at the real square one. You know, day one, you know. Our new day one's not going to be the same as our old day one.
Right,
you know?
correct.
And but you know, keeping in mind, like you said, trusting in that process and understanding that it's exactly that, it's a process. So,
Sure.
And like I said, I love that metaphor of the physical strength. You know, what goes into building physical strength is the same thing that goes into building our metaphorical strength and our affinity in any skill set or in any aspect of life. And giving ourselves just a good, strong foundation to build off of.
Yeah.
You know, and I like when you were talking about reading the dictionary, and to me, that's the strength. You have to understand words before you can put them together.
Right.
You know, and math. You have to understand 1 + 1 before you can start putting it together into algebraic equations and doing calculus and doing, you know, Stephen Hawking physics and shit like that. You know, striking. You have to know what a jab is. You have to know what a cross is. You have to know what it means to move your head before you start putting that shit together. Then a lot of people have been talking about Tyson lately because he's kind of popping back up, doing a lot of training and shit like that. But man, the first day Mike Tyson trained, he didn't look like that. You know, but he still he put in so much work to developing that strong foundation that now being in his 50s, he looks absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, monster.
You know? But every single thing that we do, there's a very basic building block of what it means to be strong and to develop, you know, strong foundation, strong fundamentals in any aspect.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's the focus, man. And that's the goal.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Cool.
What'd you say?
Love it.
I think you brought it right back around.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was awesome. Quince, man, always appreciate the time, man. Appreciate the conversation, my friend.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and probably be on kind of this bi-weekly basis as we go.
Sure.
Kind of digging this, kind of just flowing with it a little bit. Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, for supporting us, and for, you know, even after all the inconsistency, giving us a platform to practice building our strengths, and sharing that process with you guys.
There it is. Appreciate you guys. We'll catch you.